That's right, even though there's currently no such thing as a Pikmin 4, the series didn't end with Pikmin 3. It managed to get one spin-off, and it's quite a spin-off indeed. It's no longer a 3D real-time strategy game, it's a 2D action platformer of all things. This game is Hey Pikmin for the 3DS. Hey Pikmin currently sits as the last game in the series to be released, launching in 2017 for the 3DS. On the surface, the game's just a harmless spin-off that hardcore Pikmin fans can ignore if it's not their cup of tea, right? Well, they certainly don't have to play the game, but its existence alone has caused some confusion about the status of Pikmin 4. You see, on July 9th, 2015, Eurogamer posted an article stating that Pikmin 4 is very close to completion. However, the actual quote by Miyamoto upon being asked if a new Pikmin game is in the works states, "It's actually very close to completion." There's a good chance that Miyamoto was actually referring to Hey Pikmin being the game that is close to completion. Of course, we didn't know of Hey Pikmin at all at the time, and another quote by Nintendo mentions that Pikmin 4 is in development at the very least. Around this time, fans were eagerly awaiting the announcement of Pikmin 4, but that's not what we got. In September of 2016, Pikmin for Nintendo 3DS was announced, the game we know today as Hey Pikmin. Hey Pikmin was developed by Japan-based studio RZest. Not a name that you may be familiar with, but there's a chance that you may have played one of the company's works, Yoshi's New Island, and unfortunately that may bring with it a certain sense of mediocrity. Yoshi's New Island was certainly no, well, Yoshi's Island. Is it a horrible game? No, but it was pretty mediocre. So that brings us to Hey Pikmin, another 2D platformer from the company that uses a Nintendo franchise. Unlike Yoshi, however, this is the first time Pikmin has ventured into the 2D platforming genre. In fact, this is the only time the franchise has removed itself from its strategy roots. RZest didn't really have to follow in the footsteps of Nintendo's own internal development teams this time around, and had a chance to create something of their own. Although they were of course still bound by the constraints of the Pikmin series, and had to adapt aspects of the series into something that would work in the 2D space. So just how well did they do? I want to start off with the game's presentation, as there is actually a discrepancy in my recording that I want to point out right away as to not put off or deceive anyone as to how the game actually looks. Specifically, it has to do with the game's performance. You may have noticed that the frame rate for this game isn't exactly fantastic. It's a 30 FPS game, and while I was recording, I don't know if it ever managed to hit that mark. Movement is always choppy, and it gets worse during some of the busier levels. At some points the frame rate drops so low that it can actively affect gameplay in some instances, making it difficult to time your inputs correctly. It's not the most pleasant experience, but here's the thing. I was recording the game with an old 3DS XL, as that's the only 3DS capture device that I have access to. I proceeded to test the game out on a new 3DS XL, and the frame rate is much smoother, maintaining its 30 FPS target or coming much closer to it than it did on the old model, for the majority of the time. So just bear in mind that playing Hey Pikmin on a new 3DS or a new 2DS will produce smoother results than what you'll see in this video. And while we're on the topic of presentation, the fidelity of the graphics remains the same on both systems. It's a decent looking game for the 3DS that does a good job of adapting the console game's atmosphere onto a handheld. The level themes are typical of Nintendo 2D platformers like the Grass World, Ice World, Fire World, etc. There was one world which stood out to me as being somewhat unique, the Ravaged Rustworks, where levels are made up of pipe mazes, and it was actually one of my favourites in the game. Although the themes can feel generic, they actually look quite nice for the most part. The game goes for the same semi-realistic tone of the console Pikmin games in terms of the world design, and I think they got as close as they could have on the 3DS. Some levels look genuinely pretty. Background layers sometimes have colours that juxtapose with the foreground, giving this otherworldly vibe. That sort of goes against the whole post-apocalyptic Earth vibe that the series has before, which is probably a bad thing, but hey, it looks nice. There are some levels that look kinda bland though, like all of the cave levels sort of blend together with the same browns and dark blues. I'd be hard pressed to tell any of these levels apart at a glance, but at least the music's good. 3D character models can sometimes look kind of cheap in 2D games, and that kind of is the case with Olimar and his Pikmin buddies, but I quite like the look of some of the game's enemies, especially those that are unique to this game. Their stature feels menacing in this perspective, seeing as you can't sidestep them. The enemy designs in this game have mostly adopted a similar design of the Pikmin. Many have one flat colour and one defining physical feature. It's simple but makes them memorable, from a purely visual perspective that is. One area of the presentation that has just not seen the same level of care as others is the radar. Like, look at this. It's so low detailed that it looks like an Atari 2600 game. No, it looks worse than that in fact. There's minimalism and then there's the Hey Pikmin radar. I mean, it functions I guess, but it looks like they put no effort into designing it beyond that. Okay, I know you're waiting to hear it. Olimar has found himself on the Pikmin's planet for the 4th time now. How and why could he possibly head back there yet again? Well, actually, it doesn't really matter because Hey Pikmin is a spin-off in the strictest sense. It's completely unrelated to the other games and likely won't have any impact on the story going forward. But from some exchange in the first level between Olimar and the uncreatively named SS Dolphin 2, we at least know that this isn't Olimar's first encounter with the Pikmin. So how did he find himself back here? Well, he accidentally flew into an asteroid field and crash landed on the planet. Now he must recover his sparklium supply or he won't be able to return home and he will perish and his wife will become a widow, his children will grow up without a father and he will become a Pikmin head. I don't know, this is a spin-off, so the writers could have at least come up with something more original for the plot, but instead, they're basically retelling Pikmin 1. It's just so boring. Well, whatever. It's a Pikmin 2D platformer spin-off for the 3DS. I'm sure no one's here for the story. And if you are, oof, I don't know what to tell you. Go play The Last of Us or Silent Hill 2 or something. Of course, the story was never going to be the most interesting thing about Hey Pikmin. The most interesting thing is how RZest transformed the gameplay of a 3D strategy / puzzly sort of game into a side-scrolling platformer. For a start, I think they managed to get the fundamentals right. The game takes full advantage of the touchscreen for a majority of its actions. Your left hand is used to control Olimar while your right hand will be holding the stylus and doing pretty much everything else, but mainly throwing Pikmin. It's a control style that feels very reminiscent of the DS days, and to be honest, there aren't an enormous amount of 3DS games that focus on the touchscreen. On that same note, Hey Pikmin borrows another design choice commonly seen on 2D platformers on the original dual screen console. That is, displaying the game's action across both the top and bottom screen. However, because the game relies so heavily on touch controls, a majority of the game's action takes place on the bottom screen. I mean, obviously you can't touch the top screen. Like, did you not heed Wario's advice from the WarioWare Touched manual? The top screen displays areas of interest that can sometimes be reached by Olimar himself, or more than likely a puzzle that must be solved with use of the Pikmin. Oftentimes it can feel like a bit of a waste of real estate by having most of the action take place on the smaller of the two screens, but I guess it's not really something that can be helped given the nature of the game. And the top screen is utilised often enough and in a seamless fashion that it didn't take long for me to stop thinking about it. It should also be noted that there is no stereoscopic 3D in Hey Pikmin. 3D is something that Nintendo did begin to shy away from in the system's later titles, and I suppose it's a given for Hey Pikmin seeing as how much the game focuses on the bottom screen, but I'm sure there are some people that may be disappointed by this. All of these factors do make Hey Pikmin feel like a game that would have been right at home in the DS generation, as it doesn't take advantage of the 3DS's unique capabilities, apart from Amiibo support of course, but we'll get to that in a bit. Hey Pikmin is more than just your simple get to the end of the level kind of platformer. In fact, perhaps calling it a platformer isn't entirely accurate. As you pursue through the game's 40 plus levels, it's also important to look out for the game's many treasures, of which there is usually around 2 to 4 of in each level. To that end, in Hey Pikmin the player is required to explore each of the levels in depth rather than simply cruising from point A to point B. The levels are designed to make this style of play more interesting, with almost every level having many branching paths to find and puzzles to complete in order to nab each piece of treasure. Like the console games, this is all done with the help of the Pikmin, but unlike those games, Olimar has much more versatility and is required to do some of the dirty work himself. He still can't fight, but has much more maneuverability thanks to his new jetpack. I don't know why none of the other explorers decided to take a jetpack along with them in the past. It would have made getting around a whole lot easier, but I digress. Anyway, Olimar is much more capable of getting into nooks and crannies this time around. In fact, in level 4A, the player must traverse half the level without a single Pikmin, relying on the limited abilities of the Hocketation, and having to sneak past enemies rather than fighting them. It's clever moments like this where Hey Pikmin stands out from its console counterparts. They're not plentiful, but they are different and fairly enjoyable. Like I said, Olimar cannot fight enemies by himself, and there are times where it is a must to have his Pikmin compatriots by his side. And yeah, they're strong in this game alright. Maybe a bit too strong. Simply put, combat in this game is boring and enemies are pretty brain dead. Many of them go down in a single hit, or can be easily dispatched by throwing a few Pikmin on top by tapping the screen above them. Hey Pikmin features over 50 enemy types, but they are all dealt with in pretty much the same manner, with few of them maybe having an elemental resistance. I know combat in previous games was mostly just lobbing some Pikmin at a guy until it's dead, but at least it was fun to avoid their attacks, or you had to aim for a weak point. Even the brand new enemies in Hey Pikmin don't offer much more. It's a shame too, because I do like how some of the new enemies look, but their boring mechanics betray their likeable appearance. Hopefully some of these guys appear in future games where the developers do more with them. The game's boss battles are noticeably more fun to tackle, with unique arenas and thoughtful attack patterns, and with their size they are this game's set pieces. They can be a bit one note, but I'd say I'd had fun with them overall. Besides fighting enemies and solving puzzles, a lot of your time spent in Hey Pikmin will simply be exploring. not just for the hidden treasures but also hidden paths and secret exits that lead to extra levels a la Super Mario World. It's a fun way to increase the length of the game for those going for all of the treasures, but there's a bit of a flaw here. While the secret exits can often be hidden by a cleverly concealed part of the screen or a certain Pikmin quota, the hidden paths can often look the same as the regular path. In some levels, finding a secret exit is sometimes a case of going left instead of going right. This can be a problem when it comes to replaying a level after a certain amount of time has passed. If you don't remember which path led to the secret exit, you could end up just taking that one again by mistake and have to redo the level yet again, and some of these levels aren't short. That doesn't just go for the secret exits, but also the treasures in general. Many treasures aren't on hidden paths, but simply on an alternate path. This can be frustrating on a first playthrough because you can miss a treasure by unluckily taking the wrong path and being unable to backtrack. It can also be frustrating on a clean-up playthrough. Say you only missed the first treasure of a level and want to pick that up and run through the level. Well, there's a good chance that you'll traverse an optional area by mistake just to find a treasure that you've already collected and feel like you've wasted your time. For me, this is what made going for every treasure in this game feel like a complete slog and really not much fun at all. Finding treasures in this game is actually important. You can't beat the game simply by waltzing through all of the levels. This is because treasures supply Olimar with valuable sparklium. In order to fight the final boss and finish the game, a certain amount of sparklium is needed. It's not a crazy high number, and if you're picking up treasures as you go, you should be fine with hitting that goal. While I didn't find it much fun to replay levels to grab every treasure, I did find collecting treasures at a leisurely pace to be decently fun. It does help that some of the treasures are pretty cool items such as NES cartridges. Finding treasures is not the only means of gathering sparklium. There are also short minigames that you can play along the way to earn a bunch of the stuff. And these are good fun too, and a nice change of pace from exploring. Sparklium also provides the player with new upgrades at certain intervals. It's an idea that I was excited by at first, but sadly the upgrades are really nothing special. The only substantial upgrade is the very first one that allows you to use the Atari radar to find treasure. It may look crappy, but it is somewhat useful. After that, it's mostly just additional health bars or jetpack extenders, a bit of a letdown. As with every Pikmin game, we've got to talk about the Pikmin. I mean, hey, it's in the name. Well, not hey, I meant Pikmin's in the name. Oh, I suppose hey is actually in the name as well. It's a stupid name for a game when you think about it, but hey, right now we're talking about Pikmin, and they're handled quite a bit differently in Hey Pikmin. For starters, Olimar doesn't grab a bunch of Pikmin from the onion before starting his day like the other games. Instead, he can only use the Pikmin found in that level, which I've got to say is a really dull way of going about it. It means that level layouts and puzzles are tailor-made to whatever type of Pikmin shows up in that level. It can lead to fun scenarios where the player has to leave one type behind and work their way back to the previously deserted Pikmin type with a new type in order to progress, for example. But things like this are few and far between because the majority of levels only feature one type. Oftentimes levels are simply use rock Pikmin to smash through crystal, use fire Pikmin to extinguish fire, and so on and so forth. I think this kind of design would be more tolerable if you could take newly discovered Pikmin back to older levels. In the other Pikmin games, it's fun to explore past levels knowing that a newly acquired Pikmin type will allow you to explore previously inaccessible areas, even though these areas were clearly signposted. If this was how it works in Hey Pikmin, it would have made replaying older levels for treasures more fun and would have made it more clear which paths were optional, or made it more of a challenge to find secret exits. Added to this, there aren't really stakes for losing Pikmin, as most levels have little stations where you can refill your Pikmin, so it's never possible to dip below the required amount to clear a level. Occasionally there are treasures near the end of the level that require a certain amount of Pikmin, but it's not often that this is the case. The only reason to worry about keeping your minions alive is if you're crazy enough to try to aim for the gold Pikmin seals. These seals are earned by completing a level without a single casualty. On the surface this doesn't seem too difficult, and you know it really shouldn't be, but Pikmin don't always behave the way you'd like them to in Hey Pikmin. You can't separate them from Olimar and they'll always cling to him, meaning that you have to be extra careful when escorting them through hazardous areas, lest they touch a pixel of an enemy that appeared out of nowhere. Furthermore, sometimes they just seem to fall behind, but unlike the original Pikmin where the clumsy creatures could randomly trip, it doesn't feel like a gag in this game, but an issue with their pathing. Stay separated from a Pikmin for too long and they will actually perish for some reason. Whether that's supposed to be from an off-screen monster or a suicide provoked by sudden loneliness, it's bloody annoying. It's also very easy to accidentally kill a Pikmin by being a hair off of your mark and throwing an enemy directly in front or behind a small enemy, as Pikmin can only deal damage on impact in this game. And if you miss your target, they may end up running straight into the enemy. Cool. And that's why I didn't bother even attempting to go for the gold Pikmin seals. It just didn't sound fun at all. The only other reason to try to keep Pikmin at the end of a level is the Pikmin Park. If these idiots manage to make it back in one piece, they'll be added to your Pikmin total in the park. and can be assigned to search an area to unearth treasure and sparklium. It's so ridiculously simple, stupid, and not even really worth the effort considering you'll likely have more than enough sparklium playing through the game's levels, but I've got to say, I actually had fun with Pikmin Park. Even though there wasn't much more to it than appointing some Pikmin to jump in a bush. Don't know why they lose their eyes in the park though. Perhaps Oliver's doing some weird experiments on them, and if he is, maybe the story of this game is deeper than I thought, and I'm so glad it's not canon. I do have another major gripe with the Pikmin in this game. Why no purple or white Pikmin? Like, I can kinda see why they did it in Pikmin 3 story mode as to not overwhelm the player with too many options, but Hey Pikmin's levels are specifically designed to fit the Pikmin types that appear in it. The 2 extra types would have served to create even more variety in the different levels and puzzles. It actually baffles me that they're not here. With that being said, I do think that the level variety is decent. There's a level that revolves around pushing blocks, a level that sees the player ascend upward through a series of elaborate pipes, and some gimmicky levels like 7C that involve sliding down a hill, to name a few. However, sometimes parts of Hey Pikmin feel like deja vu. Not to previous Pikmin games, but previous 2D platformers, especially Yoshi's Island. There are a few levels where I'm like, yeah, that's just straight up taken from Yoshi's Island. Which is funny because the development team already reused a bunch of ideas from Yoshi's Island in their own Yoshi's Island game. But apparently that wasn't enough, they had to inject some of that into a Pikmin game as well, of all things. Thankfully, unlike RZ's developed Yoshi's New Island, the soundtrack in Hey Pikmin doesn't get close to the lowest lows of that game. In fact, I think the soundtrack on Hey Pikmin is surprisingly good and underrated. Seriously, if you told me tracks like Brilliant Garden, Ravaged Rustworks, and Caves were from a Hajime Wakai composed Pikmin soundtrack, I'd have believed you. Many of the game's tracks are in keeping with the level themes and the relaxed nature of the Pikmin series, apart from the boss tracks of course, which are fast paced and intense. It's good stuff. But now we come to the game's most egregious aspect, the Amiibo functionality, the problems with which are twofold. Firstly, let's start with the phrase that sends shivers down any gamer's spine: pay to win. The Pikmin Amiibo can be leveled up as more and more Pikmin set up home in the Pikmin Park. This Amiibo can then be scanned at any point in the game to immediately replenish your army of Pikmin, making an already pretty easy game even easier. Then there's the second use of Amiibo, which is super slimy. As you progress through the game's 8 worlds, you'll notice the Amiibo symbol appear across different parts of the world map. This is technically locked content that is hidden behind an Amiibo paywall. Scanning compatible Amiibo such as Mario or Splatoon Amiibo will open up many challenges on these locations in which you'll earn a treasure of said Amiibo. For completionists, well, you're not collecting 100% of this game's treasures unless you own all of the compatible Amiibo. It's a cash grab whichever way you slice it. Well, that's all there is to say about Hey Pikmin. It reminds me a lot of Chibi-Robo's Ziplash. They took a unique franchise and converted it into a cheaper, generic platformer for the 3DS. I will say that I enjoy it more than Chibi-Robo Ziplash, and it does have its moments of creativity, but there are just too many moments of tedium, repetition, and general jankiness for me to elevate it anything past an meh, it's okay. Well, until Nintendo delivers us that sweet nectar that will be Pikmin 4, that's it for the Pikmin series. Let me know what your hopes and dreams are for Pikmin 4 in the comments below, and if you'd like to check me out anywhere else, you can find me on Twitter at jamiethepayne and also on Twitch, also jamiethepayne. But until next time, have fun playing video games.